April 11th, 1975. North Vietnamese artillery light up the skies of Xuan Loc. The 7th and 341st Divisions of the NVA continued their attacks in the town, but nothing was working. Commander Cam of the NVA, who had fought in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu against the French, wrote in his memoirs, "This was the most ferocious battle I had ever been involved in my personal assessment was that after 3 days of battle, even after committing our reserves, the situation had not improved and we had suffered significant casualties." In the following days, South Vietnamese President Nhan resigned his position and was replaced by Chan Van Hung. The entire structure of the country is quickly collapsing and everyone is uncertain about the future. But one thing was for certain: the Vietnamese Air Force had one more trick up its sleeve. On April 22nd, 1975, as the PAVN took Xuan Loc, a giant C-130 plane flew 20,000 feet above the headquarters of the 341st PAVN Division, the same soldiers besieging Xuan Loc. After circling around, it delivers a 750-pound bomb, unlike any of the bombs used in combat during the entire war. Within an instant of the explosion, spreading downward from the skies, 250 North Vietnamese soldiers vaporize, while some of the unlucky ones were suffocating from the bomb's harmful effects. 4 acres of land were engulfed in a fireball of death that witnesses from miles around could see. A large mushroom cloud rose up into the skies as onlookers stared in confusion as to what happened. Was that a nuclear bomb? News outlets such as Nhan and Radio Hanoi would complain to the international world that the South Vietnamese have dropped weapons of mass destruction on them, escalating the late war into untold levels until they realized it wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. 2 days later, the United States Department of Defense acknowledges that a bomb may have been used by the South Vietnamese to suffocate troops attacking Xuan Loc, and the bombs might be capable of using all the air within 20 yards and suffocate troops. Major General Nguyen Siddle said, "The bombs, which create very high pressures over the ground by explosions of aerosol, were never designed to be anti-personnel weapons." However, it was not enough to halt the relentless North Vietnamese advance into the south, as the ARVN had collapsed their defenses to buy more time towards the defense of the capital. Within days, the government of Saigon surrendered on April 30th. A short-lived Vietnamese civil war ends, just as many allied nations evacuate their citizens in the midst of the reunification of Vietnam under a communist government. So what exactly happened? First, let's discuss the bomb. Was it really nuclear? No. If it was, you'd be seeing 30-minute video essays about it. What was it? The CBU-55, or the Cluster Bomb Unit 55, was a cluster bomb, also known as a fuel-to-air bomb. Unlike the other bombs dropped in the war, it had an explosion that was near the level of a nuclear bomb before the Moab was made. It was known among U.S. troops stationed in South Vietnam as the Daisy Cutter, used to flatten hill and vegetative surfaces to create smooth and safe landing surfaces for helicopter soldiers to dismount into the fight. However, it was different from the other Daisy Cutters in that it was fuel to air, not a bomb with napalm or other liquid materials that the bigger 15,000-pound BLU cluster bombs were made of. Fuel to air, a bomb that contains propane accessories such as fuel to explode a huge radius of air and land. That is why it suffocated the North Vietnamese troops that did not see it coming that day. It was a terrible bomb that essentially evaporated your lungs if it didn't already vaporize you instantly. Among the dozen types of bombs and mines used by the US in Vietnam, this was among the most powerful types and is considered the most terrible non-nuclear weapon in the war. A cluster bomb is a fuel-to-air explosive device fitted with sub-bombs that spread the area of damage even more than a regular bomb would. Because of this, shrapnel is barely the focus of this type of attack. It is a cluster of mini-bombs. Because of its fuel and chemical-like properties, it causes a fireball from the heat of the explosion to rob the oxygen from the area of impact, sucking the life out of any aerobic organism. The Arvin bombs were so powerful that Nhan news media stated that the enemy mobilized 60 to 70 arrivals of aircraft to attack fiercely every day. In some places, they even used CBU-55 bombs with great destructive power, causing us significant damage. It was so powerful that they thought the US finally got nuclear and started World War III and reanimated General Westmoreland to summon Operation Fracture Jaw into reality, but instead it was just a bunch of puppet soldiers. However, South Vietnam did have nuclear power right as the fall of Saigon was occurring, but that's a video for another day. The specifications of this CBU-55 cluster bomb, also known as the vacuum bomb, the block bomb, the fuel-to-air bomb, the luminescent bomb, the I thought it was a nuclear bomb until I fact-checked bomb. It was 2.3 meters in length, 0.36 meter in diameter, weighs 235 kilograms, and is made up of 3 BLU-73 submunition mini-bombs. Each submunition weighed 45 kilograms, loaded with 32.6 kilograms of ethylene oxide. Attached to the bomb was a parachute to reduce the falling speed to 33 meters per second. As I have stated earlier, it is a fuel-to-air bomb that uses fuel to create a fireball that sucks up all the air in the area, creating an aerosol explosion rather than a shrapnel-producing explosion. The lethal radius of the explosion is 500 meters, or 123.6 acres, according to North Vietnamese sources, while the explosive radius is 4 acres wide, according to US sources. The fatal radius of the submunitions was 50 meters. The shockwave expands up to 2,500 feet. But for the crew of the C-130 that dropped the bomb on Xuan Loc on April 22nd, 1975, they could feel it for more than 5 miles from the center of the explosion. Assuming you have a C-130 or any subsonic plane readily available, you would load this CBU-55 bomb into the cargo plane through its ramp. Flying at least 6,000 meters above your intended target, the ramp of the C-130 should open, allowing the men of the cargo plane to push the 235 kilogram bomb down the ramp. Once the bomb slides out, it will descend due to gravity and pull out a cargo extraction parachute sideways below the sled carrying the bomb. The parachute is used to stabilize and slow down the bomb towards the target. As the bomb descends, the sled holding the bomb will fall out with the parachute falling into a different spot. From that point on, in less than 30 seconds after being released from the C-130 plane, the trigger will impact the ground, causing an explosion that will reach hundreds of yards. It will create a blast wave that exceeds 2,500 feet, sucking air upwards, creating a mushroom cloud. The fireball that is created will suck up all the oxygen in the area, basically shrinking the lungs of all living creatures in the spot if they didn't already vaporize. The shockwave can be heard 3 miles away. There, you will reach a kill streak of 239 soldiers. Congratulations. The intended use of the cluster bombs were usually to flatten dense forests into helicopter landings for troops under the Free World Military Assistance Forces to land. American veterans of the US military would often note how large the explosion was before they landed. The specific events that this type of bomb was used offensively were in Laos during the Battle of Skyline Ridge in 1970, which saw the halting of a North Vietnamese offensive in one of the longest battles of the Vietnam War. In Lam Sum 719, South Vietnamese used that during their offensive into Laos as they drove through the dense rainforests of Laos. Quang Tri in 1972, when it was used to blast the walls of the citadel, the CBU-55 was only used in Vietnam and no other wars, because the US military-industrial complex after that point found better bombs. Was it used later on? During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, over 200 cluster bombs were used to clear mines. However, it was the CBU-72 variant that was used. Later on in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was used up until a coalition of countries fighting those countries favored MOABs and FOABs. However, at that time, it was the BLU-82 variant rather than the CBU-55. Was it a horrible weapon? Yeah, if you didn't hear enough of what it does to your lungs, skin, and life, it's not meant to be used on soldiers. It was meant to clear mines and create landing zones for aircraft. But technically it is not illegal because it's neither nuclear, chemical, or biological. Using it accidentally on troops is more of a whoopsie, like dropping gasoline on a bad guy or running over someone with a tank. So what happened after? When the North Vietnamese Army and its possible spies witnessed the event, they would relay the message to the newspaper
Nhan
regarding the massive bomb the US supplied the South Vietnamese forces from Thailand to drop on the unsuspecting PAVN troops that just besieged Xuan Loc. On the Nhan newspaper number 7660, April 24th, 1975, they complained that it was an asphyxiation bomb, or a bomb that was using chemical and biological properties that fit the category of WMD, basically saying that they were nuked for what feels like the first time the Cold War got hot. I'm not kidding, it says it in the newspaper right here. It's pretty wild. The newspaper complained to the international community, calling for the US to be punished for their crimes against peace and humanity, such as evacuating refugees from battle zones and saying it's human trafficking. They would go on to state that the US violated the Paris Peace Accords of 1973, despite the fact that they were already invading South Vietnam and violating any idea of peace. Whoa, time out, I know we invaded, but we're gonna need another ceasefire agreement to assess. But this is just the state-run newspaper of North Vietnam, and not the government of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam stating this. Even Radio Hanoi was broadcasting this message for 2 days after the bombing, until they realized it was a conventional bomb and there was not enough evidence to suggest that it was a nuclear, biological, or chemical weapon. This is a common tactic used by any side of the war to undermine the other by any means, so it is not surprising. To be honest though, no one was following a peace agreement in a war fought in dense, invisible jungle in a developing country. There will be another video on the ceasefire of 1973 and the mini-war that happened while it was being signed. I promise. Witnesses: Xuan Loc and Long Can, Dong Nai province. After 12 days and 12 nights in what was said to be one of the fiercest battles of the Spring Offensive of 1975, Mr. Vo Tang Dung, who calls himself Hoang Phi Ho, but also called Tu Ho by everyone else, who was also the former district party secretary during the period, witnessed this event. He was part of North Vietnam's People's Army of Vietnam in Xuan Loc when he saw the bomb explode in a site known as Slope C. Along with Mr. Lê Hữu Tag, he was acting deputy political commissar of the Long Can City Military Command. They both witnessed the devastating aftermath of the CBU-55's power. Mr. Tak recalled the radio urging military and civilians to be ready for more chemical attacks. Since the PAVN's army unit stationed there were fresh new recruits, they had no gas mask equipment, so they had to apply perfume and urine to their faces in case another bomb was dropped. The good old classic World War I treatment. Other witnesses of the incident saw the victims of the bomb appearing pale, bleeding from the ears and noses, with bruised faces, foaming from the mouths. The area which was bombed, according to Mr. Tu Ho, was near a rubber plantation with half a kilometer of fallen trees. It was empty, void of life, around Slope C. Following the end of the war, the Hữu Tak was sent by a local authority to lead a Soviet scientific delegation to survey Slope C. It led to the conclusion that it was dropped by the South Vietnamese and not the Americans. Mr. Tu Ho said regarding the witnessing of the bomb exploding on his comrades many years ago, "We are afraid when we pass away, there will be no witnesses left to tell the next generation the war stories around Slope C." I know this is old news and all, but this all reminded me of the recent US bunker busting of the Iranian nuclear sites in the summer of 2025. If you were to tell me that the millionaire Donald Trump would drop a bomb on the hostile Islamic Republic of Iran on top of their nuclear sites back in 2008, I would have thought you meant the wealthy President George W. Bush drops a large bomb in Iraq following the accusation that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. Also, I was in 4th grade watching Naruto. I wouldn't get anything you're saying. But the point is, the idea of war-ending bombs being used in history is such an unthinkable concept for people who are far removed from the era. Am I saying people will forget about the 12-Day War, which I cannot believe is a real subject on Wikipedia and soon our educational textbooks? No, but the idea of a nuclear-sized bomb being used in the last days of the Vietnam War and never being used again and not being mentioned is alarming. Considering how much the war has gradually been reduced as American super soldiers versus rice farmers with nunlaw hats, there's definitely more to the war than just the Tet Offensive. Same with the first Indochina War and Dien Bien Phu. Are we going to forget all the stuff that happened in the decade between? People just sit around having tea in the meantime? What's going on? Basically, the Vietnam Wars are popular for the wrong reasons, and the amount of information and events that happen in it are almost to the scale of how interesting World War II is of the popular history scene. Anyways, if you were to tell me Iran had another revolution in 2026 back in the summer of 2025, I would think you were fear-mongering. Nevertheless, I wanted to discuss this in a short video to spark some interest in this topic, because maybe I didn't say enough. What do you guys think about the topic? Should the South Vietnamese have dropped the nuke on North Vietnam? The bomb on North Vietnam? Thanks for watching, and be sure to catch the next one.